So for the first card, we're gonna do this little image here. So I've got my stamp here. I'm just gonna stamp on this scrap that I was using for the earlier video. I've already got my image stamped. I like to stamp it and then let it sit for about 10 minutes or so, so the ink is completely dry. I don't want a chance that the ink hasn't totally dried yet and possibly smear it. So make sure that you've got ink over your whole thing. Once you put your image where you want, I like to hold it in the center and just press gently around to make sure that I have a really good clear impression. And there we go. So this isn't going to go to waste. I'll color it and use it for another project. But like I said, I like to make sure that my ink has a really good chance to completely dry before I do anything with it. Now the first thing I'm going to do is not actually even coloring. See how I've got this gray around the outside? I like to do that. It's kind of like a faux matte. I'm going to do that on a scrap piece of paper. Now the reason I like to do this ahead of time is the very odd chance that your marker slips and you have to restamp your image. Better to do it now than once it's completely covered. So I'm using the long side of my chisel tip, and most of the pressure is going off of my piece, and I'm just running it alongside the paper. If your paper is heavier, you'll have an easier time with this. If it's lighter, that's when it's got a better chance of slipping. But it's a great way to add the illusion of a matte on your image without needing another piece of cardstock. And it also just kind of makes it pop up off of the green piece, in my opinion. All right, so let's get that scrap piece of paper back again. I like to color with a scrap piece of paper underneath because you'll see here, your ink will go underneath. It soaks right through the paper. It's meant to do that. It's supposed to do that. And by having a piece of paper underneath, you have somewhere for that to go. It's not going to go onto your surface and then have the possibility of absorbing the ink, because if it sinks into the paper or onto the surface and I've moved it, and say I'm coloring with yellow and I've got green underneath, there's a chance of rehydrating that green. So I want to make sure that I'm on a piece of paper, and I typically try not to move my image as I'm coloring it. So the very first layer of color I put down, I'm just kind of light. It's almost like I'm using little feather strokes. It's very, very light. It's a very small amount of ink. There's not going to be a whole lot that goes through. Then I'm going to use my darker gray, and all of the colors that I'm using will be listed on the supply sheet. And I'm just adding the darker color where I want to have the shadow, where I want it to be a little bit darker. And typically that's when it goes behind something. When I'm coloring, I'm kind of pretending that the light is coming from the top here. So now I'm gonna, in a circular motion, I'm just going right where that light and that dark meet. And then I'm going over the whole thing again. And these are fairly small areas, so I'm usually pretty light-handed with it, and I'm just going to, these little water droplets, I turned them this color as well. Just to give them a little bit of color. I think I've got them all. I'm gonna need this one later. All right, now let's do the mushroom on her head. I've got the lightest color. This one is like a grayish, a gray brown, a gray beige, but I thought it was a perfect color for a mushroom. It's one of the neutral colors of Copic. It's this one's W1. It's a warm gray, but I thought it was perfect for the mushroom. So for these ones, I'm just using 2 colors or 2 shades. When I'm doing my shading. in some of the future cards, I'm going to do three shades of a color. Sorry, I'm having a hard time coloring and talking at the same time. It's actually kind of funny. All right, so I've got my darker in there, and now I'm going to go back, a little circular motion, just blend between the dark and the light, and then go over the entire thing. So by using 2 colors to blend for when you start, it's a little bit less intimidating than 3 colors to blend. But once we get to that, and I think it's, I can't remember whether I did the 3 colors in the second card or the third card. It's not too hard, but it'll just give you a deeper shadow. So for the underside of the mushroom, I'm using the medium gray and then the darker of the warm grays, just so that that's a little bit darker than the top of the mushroom. I'm going to do the darker color right where her hair is beside the bottom of the mushroom there. And then go back with the medium color, blend between the medium and the dark, and then go over the whole thing. And you'll find when you go over the whole thing, it just darkens the entire color, and it just deepens that. All right, so we're going to do the same on these tiny mushrooms here. I'm going to do the lightest of the warm grays. And then the medium tone. This is one of those things that it seems like it's so much harder when you're new to it, but as you get used to it, there's a pattern to it. So when you're blending with 2 colors, it's light, dark, and then back over with the light. With 3 colors, it's light, medium, dark, medium, light. But you'll see with just the 2 colors, you get a decent amount of shading in it. I'm just going to do the medium and the dark with the underside of that mushroom. And there's really not a whole lot of area to blend. We still do it anyways. All right, now I've got some browns here for her hair. And because there's not a whole lot of area for her hair, there's not really a whole lot to do shading with, but I will still add some dark areas closer to where her hair goes behind her face. It's funny how just a tiny little bit of a darker color, it just gives it more depth, more interest, makes it look a little bit more realistic. And I just realized that I missed this part of the wing here. The nice thing about Copics too is if I wanted to go back into this mushroom, say it wasn't as shaded as I wanted it to be, I could absolutely go back into it. It's not a one and done. When you're working with dye markers, you kind of are very conscious of how much time you're coloring on that image, because sooner or later that paper is going to start to pill and to break down, and that doesn't happen with Copic markers.